up. So I would ask you, if a foreign country bombed our air defense missiles, captured and removed our president, and blockaded our country, would that be considered an act of war? Would it be an act of war if someone did it to us? Nobody dies, few casualties, they're in and out, boom, it's a perfect military operation. Would that be an act of war?
Senator Rand Paul just flipped the script and just asked one question that silenced the entire room.
Or initiate war. Virtually unanimously, they decided, and what was entered into the Constitution was that the declaration or initiation of war would be the power of Congress. Now, we have many advocates, many of whom are here today, who have been advocates for an expansive notion of presidential power. They often argue that wars are not really wars, that they're kinetic actions or drug busts. I think, though, if you reverse the circumstances, it becomes very difficult for these arguments to hold up. So I would ask you, if a foreign country bombed our air defense missiles, captured and removed our president, and blockaded our country, would that be considered an act of war?
Well, I think your question is about and I will acknowledge you've been very consistent on all these points the entire career. So let me, no matter who's in charge. So I will point to two things. The first is it's hard for us to conceive that an operation that lasted about 4.5 hours and was a law enforcement operation to capture someone we don't recognize as a head of state, indicted in the United States, wanted with a $50 million bounty.
My question would be, if it only took 4 hours to take our president, it's very short, nobody dies on the other side, nobody dies on our side, it's perfect. Would it be an act of war?
We just don't believe that this operation comes anywhere close to the constitutional definition of war.
But would it be an act of war if someone did it to us? Nobody dies, few casualties, they're in and out, boom, it's a perfect military operation. Would that be an act of war? Of course it would be an act of war. I'm probably the most anti-war person in the Senate, and I would vote to declare war if someone invaded our country and took our president. So I think we need to at least acknowledge this is a one-way argument. One-way arguments that don't rebound, that you can't apply to yourselves, that cannot be universally applicable are bad arguments. So my next question would be, let's say it's not a war. And we're just going to define it away and say it's not a war. That's one of the arguments. So it's a drug bust. What if a foreign country indicts our president for violating a foreign law? Should we extradite our president, or should we be okay if they come in and get him by force?
Look, I think ultimately we're always going to act in our national interest. And so if somebody comes after our national interest, like the case you've described, which obviously does not exist at this time, but the case you've described, the U.S. always has the right to act in its national interest and to protect itself. So really I don't know about this equivalency. Well, does this justify them doing it? We're always going to do what's best for the United States and America. We're always going to protect our system.
But the point isn't, and you're exactly right, we will act in our national interest, and we should. So I'm not disagreeing with you at all. What I'm saying is, though, that our arguments are empty then. The drug bust isn't really an argument. It's a ruse. The war argument, not a war, is a ruse. It's not a real argument. And we do what we do because we have the force, we have the might, we do it because it's in our interest. So we wouldn't let anybody come in, bomb us, blockade us, and take our president. We've had arguments about legitimate, illegitimate presidents, bad elections, rigged elections. So there's all kinds of same arguments that we've had in our country that they've had in Venezuela. But we wouldn't argue for an indictment. And these things aren't idle speculation. I mean, Netanyahu's been indicted by the ICC. And one of the reasons I object to being part of the ICC, and I would say you and the administration probably agree, is we're not going to let any international council indict our president and arrest him somewhere on foreign soil. We're not going to do that. We actually, most of us probably object to indicting Netanyahu in that way as well. So I think the arguments are invalid. So we did get the legal opinion that Senator Kaine referred to, the OLC opinion, Office of Legal Counsel. And I think a lot of it's been released. Plus, they came to our caucus and talked most of the open about everything they had classified. So I will talk about at least one of the arguments. They say this war wasn't a constitutional war, therefore it doesn't rise to the constitutional notion of us declaring or having to initiate the war. It just doesn't rise. And one of their main arguments was not enough people died. And so there is some number that they aren't specific, but there is some number. I would assume, although I'm not positive, but the 50, 60,000 soldiers who died in Vietnam might be enough for them to call that a war. But here's the problem. It isn't the number, it's that it happens in retrospect. See, our founders gave us the power to initiate or declare war. They didn't give us other powers to execute the war. Those are left to the president. But if we have to wait to see how many people are killed, we have to wait, as they describe it, as the scope, nature, and extent. If we have to wait to see the scope, nature, and extent, the war has been going on for some time. It's hard to vote to initiate a war that's been going on. And we can say this war is over, but we're still blockading it, and we may go back in. But there are no clear answers. You know, we put 2,000, we leave 2,000 troops in. Are we going to call that war and initiate it? So the definition of war is very important. And I think we have to acknowledge the problems with our argument. Calling things kinetic action is a disservice to our soldiers. Oh, you weren't really wounded in war. You don't have a Medal of Honor for war. You have a Medal of Honor for a kinetic action. So I think let's call it what it is, and let's vote on these things. But I think we're in violation of both the spirit and the law of the Constitution by bombing a capital, blockading a country, and removing elected officials. And we certainly wouldn't tolerate it, nor would I if someone did it to us.
Well, we didn't remove an elected official. We removed someone who was not elected, and it was actually an indicted drug trafficker in the United States. And their system—
Our laws, indicted under our laws. Look, Bolsonaro says that Da Silva is not really the president of Brazil. Our president said Biden wasn't really the president. Hillary Clinton said in 2016 Trump wasn't the president. So you have these arguments, and I agree with you. It probably was, and most likely was, most assuredly was a bad election. He wasn't really elected. But at the same time, if that's our predicate, and you don't have to come to us because it's a drug bust, we're just removing somebody, you can see where it leads to, and it leads to chaos. And that's why we have rules like the Constitution, so we don't get so far out there that presidents can do whatever they want. It is this check and balance. And I would argue for 70 years we've been going the wrong way. It isn't just this president, but it's a debate that I think is worth having.
Senator Rand Paul just asked one question in a congressional hearing that nobody could answer, and the silence said everything. America bombed Venezuela's air defense systems, America blockaded the country by sea, and American forces went in and removed their leader. The White House called it a law enforcement operation, a drug bust. They said it wasn't a war. They said Congress did not need to vote on it. But Senator Rand Paul had a different question. What if Venezuela did the exact same thing to us? What if a foreign country decided that our president was illegitimate? What if they indicted him under their own laws, put a $50 million bounty on his head, and then sent their military in? What if they bombed our air defense systems, blockaded our coastlines, and had their forces inside our country within 4 hours? Clean operation, few casualties, in and out. Would we call that a drug bust? Of course we would not. We would call it an act of war. We would mobilize, we would respond. And Senator Paul, who calls himself the most anti-war member of the United States Senate, said he would personally vote to declare war if that ever happened to America. So here is the problem. The founders of this country debated this exact issue. They argued extensively over who should have the power to send America into conflict. And virtually unanimously, they decided that power belongs to Congress, not the president. Congress. It is written directly into the Constitution. But for decades, presidents from both parties have found ways around it. They call wars kinetic actions. They call invasions law enforcement operations. They redefine the language so that the rules no longer apply, and Congress has largely allowed it to happen. Senator Paul's argument is not just about Venezuela. It is about a pattern, a 70-year pattern of the executive branch slowly absorbing war powers that were never meant to belong to one person. He made another point that is hard to ignore. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel and a close American ally, was indicted by the International Criminal Court, and America rejected that immediately. America said no international body has the right to indict and arrest our allies on foreign soil. But then, America turned around and did exactly that to another country's leader. The administration's defense was that Maduro was not a legitimate president, that the election was rigged, that he was a criminal. But Senator Paul pointed out that those same arguments get made all the time, about our own elections, about our own leaders. Bolsonaro said Brazil's president was not legitimate. Our own former president said Biden was not legitimate. Hillary Clinton questioned the legitimacy of Trump's 2016 victory. If disputed legitimacy is the legal justification for military force, that door opens in every direction. And that is exactly his point. Arguments that only work one way are not real arguments. If you cannot apply the same standard to yourself, the standard is not about law or principle. It is about power. America acted in Venezuela because America had the force to do it. That may be the honest answer, but it is a very different answer than the constitutional one. The question that remains unanswered is this: should a single person have the power to take 340 million Americans into a military conflict without a single vote from their elected representatives? That is the debate Senator Paul says we have been avoiding for 70 years, and he says it is long overdue.